Welcome to the Cutting the Gordian Knot podcast. Today we are asking the question that literally nobody else is asking. And that is eating organic a sin? Now, we're going to be stretching this past just eating organic to kind of include all the things that might offend somebody listening, like essential oils or the power of sourdough, or fill in whatever you like here. But, you got to title it something. Now, to keep you from too much suspense, I'll give you an answer right now. Sometimes, no, it's not. But weirdly, I think it is probably sinful, way more than we ever talk about. And I'll be giving you a number of reasons why, pulling primarily from the thought of Thomas Aquinas. But first, the thought of the Catholic Encyclopedia. I'm going to read a few sections here. One, and it's short. It talks about superstition as, at its core, offering worship in an improper manner and through a type of excess. And this is what I think is going on. I think that we actually have a problem with superstition. And there are 4 types of superstition, and they are thus. 1, improper worship of the true God. 2, idolatry. 3, divination. And 4, vain observances. And that's the one I think we're talking about. So let me just give a little bit more of a definition than it gave there. So to worship is to assign worth. And you would think there could be no excess in assigning worth to God. How could you have an excess in assigning worth and worship to God? Well, don't worry, guys, you can't. But you can have an excess in assigning worth to certain practices and religious practices. That can be a problem. Now, to further understand what's going on, we're going to go back to the root word of superstition, which is superstitio, or something like that. And it means to stand in terror of the deity. So here's how it starts. You're afraid of, in this case, to take the first one of the 4 parts, you're afraid of God. And what do? I don't know, maybe you just are so worried you pray 1,000 Hail Marys a day and you just cover yourself in all of the religious everything constantly because you stand in terror of the deity and you're putting an excess amount of worth on all of these exterior practices and clinging to them, these outward signs and performative acts of devotion. And you're doing so in this disordered way. Well, that's the type of excess that we're talking about, and that would be the sin of superstition, right? But what about these other ones? Well, with idolatry, you're assigning too much worth to, well, something other than God. For instance, maybe it's back in the day and you want your crops to grow, or maybe it's today and you want your crops to grow. And you know that there's certain forces of nature that bring rain or something, make your crops grow. And you start to assign too much to this. You think maybe it's an anthropomorphic thing, and you make it into a god, when it's just a force of nature. Well, this is idolatry. You're assigning too much worth to this. You're assigning too much power to this simple phenomenon here. Or divination. Yeah, it's great that the stars are in this and not that alignment. Whatever. Doesn't really matter. But some people think it's like the most important thing you can know about somebody. Are you a Sagittarius? Are you a Taurus? Right? You've heard these people. That's being superstitious because they're assigning too much worth to things in this case. And finally, we have the vain observances. That would include like the idea that you can do magic or potions, things like that. That this particular mushroom, that this particular wormwood has these hidden and occult powers. Reading directly from the Catholic Encyclopedia, it says, quote, under the head of vain observances come all those beliefs and practices which, at least by implication, attribute supernatural or preternatural powers for good or for evil to causes evidently incapable of producing the expected effects. So let me give you a story. It's about, I'm not entirely sure who told me this or who had this happen to them. I think I know, but somebody was using some lemon essential oils and heard that it could take off a skin tag. There's little growths some people get on their skins. So they take their lemon essential oil, and as they open it up, they claim that the skin tag begins to quake with fear as if it knew that the lemon oil was coming. And then they applied it, and I don't think it actually removed it, but they spun a story about how it definitely worked, or at least it was scared. It was very scared. So what are they doing here? Does lemon oil have worth? I mean, sure, of course it does. Maybe in a delicious frosting. Lots of worth there. But I don't think it has much worth here. They're assigning these special secret occult powers to something which just evidently does not have this. And that's kind of a problem now, isn't it? So we didn't really bring something into these later three definitions after we talked about it with respect to superstition regarding worship of God, but we need to turn back to something that's baked in the very definition of superstition, and that is that fear aspect. What's going on there? Well, I think it actually colors the other three types of superstition. And in our case, we see that fear is active. They're worried about the skin condition. They're afraid that, like, oh, I'm ugly or this or that, whatever it is. They have this fear. They have this problem. And now this feeling, this emotion, prompts them to make an act of the will, to choose to say yes to something which is false, that the lemon oil causes skin tags to quake with fear, which, entertaining if it was true, but certainly and manifestly false. And then their reason backfills that, well, the reason it didn't leave was X, Y, and Z, or, well, maybe I didn't apply it enough times. They're letting their reason kind of clean up the scraps at the end. Now, what's going on here is just intrinsically disordered, right? So going all the way back to Plato, he talks about the rightly ordered self, and that it begins with the reason, and then it goes to the will, and then it goes to all your desires and appetites and feelings, right? So that's what we ought to have. You should look at the world and find out what is true with your intellect. So come to believe things for good reasons by encountering true things. And then that should shape what your will says yes to. And by your will, choosing to say yes to certain reasons, yes to certain goods, assenting to certain truths, in light of what the intellect first did, well, then your emotions follow. Your feelings about things ought to follow. That's rightly ordered. But superstition flips that on its head. It begins with this sensation, feeling of fear. Fear for the deity, fear for your own mortality, fear for whatever it is. And then it causes your will to choose to believe something which is false. Now, all right. Does everybody run afoul of this if you ascribe too much to essential oils? I don't think so, because if you have a rational basis to believe that your lemon oil can in fact do what you claim, and you just turned out to be wrong, I don't think that this is necessarily the sin of superstition, but hey, go and consult your friendly neighborhood ethicist for more details on this one. I think that you were leading with reason, but it just sometimes fails. And then you come to choose false beliefs as something that you're going to incorporate in your life, and then you do it. I don't think that if you're genuinely just mistaken, that's a sin of superstition. It's not. I think if it proceeds from fear, it skips the reason, it moves the will, and then you backfill reasons, I think that's a problem. It's actually sin. Yeah, guys, it's kind of a sin. All right. Now, fear can be a good motivator, right? Like you can have fear of fighting a bear, and this could keep you safe from bears. So I'm not saying that anything which begins with prompting fear is de facto bad. It's not. But you're going to have to start with fear and then make sense of this with reason and then go in the properly ordered direction. So you got to ask yourself, when you're at the grocery store and you're comparing two like cabbages, both green, leafy, or red. Red's my favorite. You're comparing two beautiful red cabbages, and one says organic, $8. The other says certainly not organic, $1.50. How do you choose between these two delicious cabbages? Well, let's say you say one of them's conventionally grown, and it's probably covered in chemicals. And the other one is organic, and I'm sure it's full of all sorts of micronutrients and minerals and nutrition that's going to make me really, really healthy. Just ask yourself, do I actually know these things? Do I have real reasons for this? Because a fear-based would simply say, oh, it has chemicals, it has preservatives, it has these things in it, and it stops there. But like a reason-based thing would be, maybe you looked up and found out how many pesticides or how much pesticide do you actually get from a cabbage? And what happens if you wash it? And is it anywhere near the established safety thresholds? And if the answer is, oh, the cabbage is going to get me, then you have a good reason to say no to one cabbage and maybe yes to another cabbage. But if you don't actually have any good reasons and you're simply operating out of fear that, oh, it's going to get me, you got to be real careful, because what you could be doing is being superstitious. Which leads me to my next thing. So I don't think everybody guilty of superstition, but I think a lot more people than you think are guilty of this. So you got to stand guard. But the next thing you could run afoul of in the grocery store is gluttony. Here's what St. Gregory says. Unless we first tame the enemy dwelling within us, namely our gluttonous appetite, we have not even stood up in order to engage in spiritual combat. So if you haven't dealt with gluttony in your life, St. Gregory says, dude, you're on the ground. Like, you're not in God's army here. You're just laying there like a slug, like a fat slug, probably. So you haven't even started spiritual combat if you have not first mastered gluttony. So this really needs to be our start. Get this one out of your way. You need to be able to discipline your flesh. And I get that. I got a little bit of undisciplined flesh right there, guys. So I'm right there with you. Here's what Thomas Aquinas writes on gluttony, because there's something that you probably haven't heard here. Gluttony denotes inordinate concupiscence in eating. Now, desire is said to be inordinate through leaving the order of reason, he says elsewhere. Okay, so that's how it's inordinate. Now, two things are to be considered in eating, namely the food we eat and the eating thereof. Accordingly, the inordinate concupiscence may be considered in two ways. First, with regard to the food consumed, and thus as regards the substance or species of the food man seeks sumptuously, or costly food as regards its quality. He seeks food prepared too nicely or daintily. As regards quality, as regards quantity, he exceeds by eating too much. Secondly, the inordinate concupiscence is considered as to the consumption of food, either because one forestalls the proper time for eating, which is to eat hastily, or one fails to observe the due manner of eating by eating greedily. So he splits it into two possible ways that you can be gluttonous. One is the stuff you eat, and two is the way you eat it. So for the way you eat it, just don't eat it really hastily or greedily, whatever that means. I think we know hastily. I don't know what it looks to be eating greedily, maybe to make sure that other people don't get it. So don't do that, guys. But he also splits this other part into two parts. The way that we're, the actual food that we're eating can either be too much, and that's what he actually mentions second. But first, it could be of too high a quality. It's just not reasonable to eat food of this quality. That it has to be costly. It has to be sumptuous. It has to be prepared, and I love that it's even in quotes, daintily, because the word daintily seems more dainty with quotes around it. So are we guilty of this when we buy organic? Well, sometimes, and probably more than we think, right? If you always demand the highest quality food that you can find in the store, that could be gluttony, right? Totally could be gluttony, because you're demanding an inordinate quality of it. So here's your hack for gluttony. Imagine St. Thomas Aquinas is shopping with you. So he looks over at your list and goes, hamburger, I got you, bud. And he throws a regular thing of 80/20 beef, Walmart brand. It's delicious, right in your cart. Would you feel comfortable being like, hey, Aquinas, I'm going to put that back, and I'm going to get the grass-fed one for 2-3 times the cost in those tiny little packages. I'm going to get that instead. What do you think he'd say? Now, it's possible he'll say, you know what, buddy? You've made a lot of money. You have plenty of money. You can dispose of this the way that you like. And I've written elsewhere that you can have nice things. This apparently is a nice thing, or at least you believe it so. Maybe you like the taste. Maybe you think it's healthier. And yeah, grass-fed beef, I'll give it to you. It is healthier. And you can live in accordance with your station in life, and you may be such that this can be part of your station in life to eat such foods. He might say that, but I think he also might say, well, what was wrong with the beef that I put in your cart? Was it rancid? Will it make you sick? And you'll go, well, I feel like sometimes I feel inflamed. Sometimes I feel inflamed when I eat it. And he'll be like, inflamed? What? No, I've never heard. No, I think you're probably good. Are you in bed afterwards? Are you sick? Can you not do your work? Can you not care for your family after eating one of these burgers? How come everybody else is buying it? They seem to be fine. They're walking along with a smile at their face. Well, maybe not in Walmart, but still. What would he say? He'd probably be very puzzled why you wouldn't buy it. If it doesn't actually make you sick, it's not rancid, it's safe, other people buy it. What's the problem? In fact, he might actually push you to just go back to the bread aisle. Just go for water and bread for a bit until you get what did St. Gregory call it? The first adversary taken care of. That's what he might say. I don't know. So that's the hack right there. Imagine you're shopping with St. Thomas Aquinas and you have to actually justify this purchase. He might ask you a tough question like, have you considered just buying the regular stuff and giving the difference to the poor? Maybe somebody who doesn't have food. Maybe that can be the test. Like, if you were shopping with a poor person, would you say, yeah, I'm not going to get you that because I'm going to get me this, and I'm going to use my money on this, and I would sooner deny you food and get the thing of highest quality. That might be a test. That's a hard one, right? For sure. In fact, I did that one time on accident. I got to a grocery store and there was a hobo, and he asked for some money, and I said, I don't have any cash, and I'm at the grocery store, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, man, just come in with me. I'll bring you shopping. We'll throw some stuff in the cart for you. So we're shopping along, me and the hobo, and we're getting some stuff for him. He's making horrible choices, buying like Capri Sun. I'm like, bro, that's not going to fill you up. It's Capri Sun. It's empty calories. Anyways, they're not known for the great choices, hobos. But we get through. We have a cart full of stuff. And he asked, oh, wait a minute. What were you buying? And never have I been as ashamed of the purchase. Like, well, we got to swing by the spice aisle because I'm picking up poppy seeds. I was out of poppy seeds. You caught me. Now, if anything's a dainty food, it's a poppy seed. And I go over and I had to buy some poppy seeds right in front of this guy. And they were like $7.50 for a jar of poppy seeds. And he's like, so, what is a poppy seed? And I'm like, it's a harder question than you might think. I don't entirely know. He's like, do they taste good? I'm like, nobody knows what they taste like. Are they healthy? Never gave it any thought. Well, what do you use them for? Poppy seed muffins. Okay. I'm like, it makes the muffin look like it's dotted with little, you know what? Let's just check out. I'll get you something extra. Let's get the Capri Sun. That's quite the experience, shopping with somebody who actually needs food. Makes your poppy seed decision look pretty stupid. I think it can also make us realize that the most important thing is not necessarily feeding ourselves the absolute highest quality thing that we can find. Many people live very happy, normal, healthy lives, fulfilling all their duties to God and man while eating the regular burger. Okay, so that brings us to the next reason eating organic could be a sin, which is probably what I should have named the podcast. And that's, we can run afoul of the sins of detraction, slander, but most of all, another one that we don't talk about much, and that's rash judgment, which is rampant in society. And I may be rashly judging you in your shopping cart right now, as a matter of fact. But let's just read a little bit about what good old Aquinas says about all this. This is in his section about judgment. Judgment is lawful insofar as it is an act of justice. Now it follows from what has been said that three, count them, three conditions are requisite for a judgment to be an act of justice. Numero uno. That's Latin, folks. Just kidding. That it proceed from the inclination of justice. Secondly, that it comes from one who is in authority. Third, that it be pronounced according to the right ruling of prudence. If any one of these be lacking, the judgment will be faulty and unjust. First, when it is contrary to the rectitude of justice, and then it is called perverted or unjust. Second, when a man judges about matters wherein he is no authority, and this is called judgment by usurpation. And thirdly, when the reason lacks certainty, as when a man without any solid motive forms a judgment on some doubtful or hidden matter, and then it is called a judgment by suspicion, or a rash judgment. So let's say, and I've heard a lot of people who get very upset and angry about, I don't know, oh, I know exactly what we'll talk about now, about glyphosate, glyphosate in people's wheat, right? People are like, oh, in the EU they don't use this, and stupid farmers in the US they're putting poison in our food supply. They're putting glyphosate in our wheat, like it's poisonous. Our children, we're all sick. There's these pesticides too, and pesticides and chemicals, the chemicals, guys. Well, hang on. You're making a judgment about what these people do. So let's just back it up. What's your motive? Is it one of justice? Maybe. I think a fair bit of people in the grocery store could pass this one. Maybe you are seeking justice here in your judgment. Next, are you an expert or are you a competent authority? Ooh, probably not. In fact, if you're listening, almost certainly not, and neither am I. And the final one could just be, are you sure? Have you actually surveyed the relevant facts? I actually talked to somebody recently. I said, all right, you're talking about these chemicals in our food. What is one that you can name? An actual one which you think is really problematic that you can name. And they told me the glyphosate. So, okay, all right. So for this podcast, for you, the listener, I did a little bit of digging with the help of AI. I used Google Gemini. Here's what I want to tell you. I asked it if we know what the safety thresholds are of glyphosate and what the common amount that we find in U.S. wheat is. And here's what it says. So the levels necessary to show harm, regulatory thresholds. Here are the regulatory thresholds which you need to know. First, no observed adverse effect level. This is the highest dose of a substance at which no adverse health effects are observed in a study. For the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the long-term, chronic, no observed adverse effect level for glyphosate comes from a developmental toxicity study in rabbits, which was determined to be 175 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. So you're given these precious little fuzzy bunnies 175 milligrams per kilo. That's a lot, all right? So now the next safety level we look at is the acceptable daily intake, or the chronic reference dose. So this is the amount of a substance that people can be exposed to on a daily basis over an entire lifetime without an appreciable health risk. And here's how they figure it out. They divide the first one, the no observable adverse effect level, by a safety factor. And that safety factor is typically 100. In other words, the EPA has established that for glyphosate, we're just going to say in our studies, we see that 175 milligrams, no observable problem. So let's do a safety factor of 100. And now that means that you could, throughout your lifetime, have 1.75 milligrams per kilo of body weight per day, and you'd be fine. Now, the European safety standard is more conservative, and they put it at half of a milligram per kilogram of body weight per day. So, for a 154-pound adult, they would need to consume 122.5 milligrams of glyphosate every day for a lifetime to reach this limit. And this isn't the we didn't find a problem. This is the 1/100th of the we didn't have a problem level. All right. So I looked into how much wheat would you have to eat if you were a 154-pound individual? And the answer was 9 pounds a day for your entire life to hit 1/100th of what we found to be the max dose in which you had zero effect. So, guys, did you know that? Were you aware of that? Were you actually so sure that glyphosate was this huge problem and maybe you're not so sure? Then, maybe you aren't an expert. I'm certainly not an expert. I did 45 seconds of asking AI and a tiny bit of research. But I will say, I'm certainly not sure. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to pass all these judgments here. There's already a huge safety factor. And that leads us to our next thing. And this is not a vice, it's a virtue. The virtue of observance. At my church, St. Thomas in Charlottesville, we recently had a men's group talk on observance. And it's a subset of justice, and our priest, Father Walter, talked about it, did a great job. And he talks about how it's the virtue of assigning honor to those with excellence and assigning honor and having deference to those who have a task of governing, informing, or doing something in society. So it's actually virtuous, and it's actually in the order of justice to say there are those who study these effects. Not me, not a competent authority. I am not an expert, and I am not confident of these judgments. But it's virtuous for me to say, I'm going to give due deference and honor to those who have done this. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have your critiques. I have my critiques, and maybe if I made myself an expert in this, I would have many more. I don't know. But just remember, it's actually a virtue to have the virtue of observance. And look that one up. It's an interesting one. We might need an entire episode on it one day. Now, here's a quick test I give to a lot of people. Now, I don't think anybody's ever passed. Maybe you guys will, because you got the warning. I ask people, what do you think about milk producers that aren't advertising or just aren't antibiotic free? Like, you've heard of this problem, I assume, that there's like the antibiotics in milk. What do you think about that? Just give me a few thoughts. Are you angry at these people? Are you avoiding that type of milk? Do you look for ones? Here's a question. Have you ever bought milk which advertised that it was free of antibiotics? And let me just give you another one. Do you think that the farmers in some sense might be greedy or malevolent by adding the antibiotics or allowing these antibiotics to be in the milk? Just stop. I'll give you 3 seconds to kind of answer some and develop your thoughts around this. And I don't know, maybe if you're listening at the grocery store, run over and see which milk brands advertise that they're free of antibiotics. You'll see some. Got it? Okay. Surprise. None of them have antibiotics. And I actually do know this for a fact because my wife had a job for a while working for the state of Virginia where she was the dairy microbiologist. She was responsible for making sure that no milk had antibiotics. They had a zero tolerance policy for this. In fact, you could get a visit to the farm to make sure that every vat gets dumped. It's an absolute no-go. This isn't a thing. That's completely made up. So for those people who are advertising, oh, we're antibiotic free, yeah, they all are. But they're kind of roping people into this idea that some of the milk have this occult powers for evil. And it doesn't. It's not based in reason. It's not true. So if you make a judgment of the milk or the farmers or our food supply or the state of Virginia or the state of the EPA's regulatory apparatus with respect to our policy on antibiotics, and you judge them harshly, well then what the heck was that? Because you weren't an expert. You weren't a competent authority. You didn't know what was going on. There you go. I hope you passed the test, guys. Most people don't. Most people don't pass that one. But this is something we really need to be careful of because a lot of great people I know are, eating lots of organic things and using all this stuff. And as you talk to them about this issue, there's a lot of anger. And there's anger at farmers, there's anger at regulatory apparatuses. And you got to be real careful with that, because detraction and slander is a serious, serious sin. Rash judgment is a serious sin, and you shouldn't do it. So if you're eating organic, it might be a sin because of that. Which leads us to imprudence. So prudence is the virtue that allows us to reliably arrive at an intended end in the best way with regard to practical judgments. That's kind of my summary there. So we ought to be prudent with regard to our health, right? But what does that mean? Well, it means we take the best route. So for instance, if you intend to be healthy by increasing your omega-3s, you might want to buy that super expensive omega-3 milk. No, don't you? You like omega-3s? It's got it. Why don't you go for it? Well, we'd want to practice the virtue of prudence, not fall into imprudence. So one brand I looked at had 500 milligrams per gallon. Another one, much more expensive, had 2,000 milligrams per gallon. Is that a lot or a little? That's not a very prudent way to get your omega-3s, because that's like one capsule, which costs maybe 18 cents and comes in a big bottle. I mean, this is not a prudent way to get your omega-3s, which by extension, this isn't a prudent strategy for becoming healthy. Because sure, omegas are great, guys. Another one I commonly hear is the Himalayan pink sea salt. They say, well, it has lots of minerals. I go, cool. Like what minerals? And the ones which is actually legitimately highest in are calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So those all important. You guys need those. And they think, well, I'm going to choose this. I'm going to pay a lot extra, and I'm going to get the minerals, right? Because it has minerals. But we got to apply the virtue of prudence, because if you want to get the minimum daily needed amount of calcium from Himalayan pink sea salt, you need to eat 0.7 pounds per day. What about magnesium? You'd have to eat 0.87 pounds of pink Himalayan sea salt per day to get the minimum recommended dose of magnesium. And if you want potassium, you're going to have to eat over 2 pounds of salt per day to get your necessary potassium, or take a bite of a banana, or eat a French fry without pink Himalayan sea salt on there. So if you want to buy pink Himalayan sea salt because you think, hey, it tastes good, cool. Because it's pink, cool. Because you're a fan of the Himalayas, cool. But be careful here that you're not being imprudent and trying to arrive at an end which you're not taking the best way to. This is not the best way to get minerals, folks. It's not even close. You'd be better off just eating almost anything else. So yeah, you don't want to fall into imprudence. Or really superstition for this one, where you're assigning it powers and worth which it does not have. Yeah, I mean, we could apply some other ones. Heck, grass-fed beef. There's a case for this. It is better for you, but yeah, you have higher levels of some B vitamins, of vitamin E, of vitamin A, right? But all those are super cheap and present in a multivitamin. So maybe the most prudent way, and I don't know, you can look into this one. Just get the regular beef and pop a multivitamin. Boom, you're good. That could be more prudent. We have to take note of what is the best way to reliably achieve that end that we're aiming for with regard to practical action, like being in the grocery store. Now, prudence would say, if your goal is health, and it's a good end, it's not an end in itself. Health is only for the purpose of something else, like loving God, loving neighbor, doing your duty, things like that. But hey, it's a good thing to be healthy. So I think that what you should do is you should move the big rocks first. So if you sleep, you work out, so you have good muscle mass and you're strong, you stay hydrated, you eat a good amount of protein, you limit your sugar consumption, you don't abuse caffeine, you don't smoke, you limit your alcohol to something reasonable, maybe eat a vegetable, you take a walk, stay active, get some fresh air and sunlight. Maybe you check for some nutritional deficiencies and solve those, right? That could make a difference. Keep your stress level reasonable and maintain a healthy weight. If you do those super normal, regular, prudent things, I think 99.99999% of people are going to be healthy. We had a guest a while ago, Sal, who's on the Mind Pump podcast, which is a fun podcast. And they're very friendly to a lot of this organic stuff and alternative medicine. But he points out that in all of his many years of training people, helping people live a healthy life, he has never seen like a supplement or something be the difference. That really what matters are the things which I just mentioned. This is somebody who has a ton of very practical granular insight into how to get people to live a healthy life. And he's not running around saying everybody needs pink Himalayan sea salt. Like, yeah, maybe you can get some advantages from eating a little bit better and whatnot, but he advocates, yeah, just eat whole foods, get your protein, work out, stuff like I just mentioned. And that's the right answer, guys. The answer isn't some strange herb necessarily. Not that herbs do nothing. Some do, some don't, but you should have a strong rationale, and that should be your beginning, not your end point. One or two more things here. One is just kind of take note that there's two kind of personalities. One type is the qualitative thinker, and the other is the quantitative thinker. I would say I lean a little bit more towards the quantitative thinking side, and I think most guys do. If you don't believe me, go ask men and women, hey, can you describe your car? And you'll hear women go, it's blue. It has a lot of space in the back. You'll hear a lot of very qualitative things about their car. And if you ask the guy, he'll be like, well, it's got a twin turbocharged 4-liter V8, and and you're going to hear a lot of numbers. You're going to hear horsepower and torque and curb weight and all sorts of numbers. But hey, your mileage may vary on that. But these are the two main categories, the qualitative and quantitative thinkers. And it's really easy to make poor decisions in this particular area of prudence with regard to health, with regard to the chemicals, with regard to the glyphosates, if you're only a qualitative thinker. So if you're just a qualitative thinker, think quantitatively, at least for a little bit. And if you can't, find a friend. Because the question you should ask in the grocery store is not, does this have chemicals? Does this have preservatives? Is there glyphosate? If I'm even saying that right. Or does it not? Instead, I think we should be asking, like, well, what quantity is there? Is it anywhere near the risk threshold? Do I eat 9 pounds of bread per day? And will I continue this for a lifetime? That we need to kind of apply a little bit more quantitative analysis. Like, oh, it's more nutritious? How much? Can I just buy the regular thing and take one extra bite? Would that put me at parity? Sometimes it will. Should I just supplement with a multivitamin and bang, I'm level with your grass-fed beef? I don't know. But we would have to solve those things, like, quantitatively. And then, of course, like the anecdotal evidence that people rely on, like my friend Brittany, she was really helped when she increased her mango rind consumption dramatically. All right, well, that is an N of 1, and I'm very happy for Brittany. But that's very different in quality to, say, a double-blind, controlled clinical trial on something, right? And I think we should all accept this. That's not the only way. Studies can commonly be bad, and we can all pick them apart. But you can also look at things like, has this been used for 1,000 years for the same purpose, and especially across cultures? Well, that is a large number of trials, which the majority were deemed, for some reason, to be successful. And there you go. So I would just invite people, if you're more naturally of a qualitative thinker, and there needs to be many such people in the world, when you try to exercise prudence in this particular way, put on your quantitative hat, folks. All right. I think I just have one more possible thing you could run afoul, and then you're safe to buy whatever grass-fed, vegan, crunchy, essential thing you jolly well please, as long as you dodge this stuff. And that is, well, I'm going to just do a test, all right? I'm going to experiment on you right now. So you're listening. Just kind of focus on your body, okay? Focus on your body. Do you feel all of your feet and hands and everything? You feel your shoulders? I'm going to ask you two questions. One, is anything kind of itchy? maybe up in your hair or scalp? Is that a little bit itchy? Or your clothes kind of weird? Maybe the tag on the back of your shirt feel like an itch. Maybe down on the bottom of your foot. Anybody feel a bit itchy right now? Feel an itch? Okay, yeah. Up there it is. There it is. You can itch it, guys. You can do it. You itched something, didn't you? You probably did. Why? Because I made you pay attention to your body, and then you find yourself itching when you're asked if you're itchy. Let me give you another one. Do you have any pain in your body right now? Like maybe your neck is a little bit tense. Is your neck a little bit stiff? Do you feel like you're kind of bending your neck forward a little bit too much? You kind of need to crack your back or roll your shoulders back for a bit. Get some tightness maybe in your back. How are your feet a little cramped? Are you sitting down right now? Like, is this comfortable? Do you need to shift? Maybe shift a little bit in your seat? Because do you feel any pain right now? Anything? Bet you a lot of you noticed a few things there, right? So what happened? Call attention to what's wrong with your body. And surprise, surprise, you're going to find something itchy, something a little painful, a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe you did roll your shoulders a few times. Maybe you are feeling a little tense. Maybe there is some truth there, but you probably had no idea that was going on before we did that little test. Let me ask you another question. What if you made a habit out of asking yourself, how'd that food make me feel? Did I digest that? Do I have a stomach ache right now? Do I feel inflamed? I don't know what inflamed means, guys, but do I feel inflamed? Do you think you'll get a yes answer more often? Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Now, if you just put that to the side and you're focusing on other things, and if it becomes important enough that it crosses the threshold of pain or discomfort to really warrant your attention, then okay, you can go ahead and solve that problem and go back to focusing on other things. Absolutely guarantee you that a practice of just focusing on yourself, how you feel, if you have any discomfort, will lead to more actual discomfort. 100% guaranteed. And also, it just makes a generally bad habit of always thinking about oneself. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a stretch, but we should be regarding, in general, other people, our duties, God, things like that. Ideas, thoughts that we have, things we need to do, it needs to be more of our focus. And it can become a habit in other ways to ask, am I upset? Am I sad? Was I offended? And if you start with things about the body, you'll find yourself slowly drifting into other things. And I think that's just generally not good for your mental, physical, or spiritual health. So be careful with that, folks. So, to wrap this up, next time you're considering going and buying that grass-fed whatever, imagine good old Thomas Aquinas, a dude who probably fasted a lot, probably ate some simple food in his time and would have been thrilled to get anything at the grocery store. And just be really careful about your attitude towards the things which are here, because our attitude ought to be incredible gratitude for where we live, what we have to eat, its safety, its convenience. We live in a wonderful time. People live a massive amount of time. Plenty of people eat very normal things and live very healthy lives. So let's just kind of summarize here. The big ones that we hit were superstition. You got to lead with reason, go to will, then get to things like your emotions. But instead, you can be prompted by fear. People can make you afraid of chemicals. And I get it, right? Health's important. Your family's important. But they can push you into fear with marketing and who knows what else. And then you can choose things not rationally, but be assigning good or evil powers to things when they don't actually have that. And that's applying a worth to things which actually don't have that type of worth. It's just not that important. So be careful of superstition. Not everybody who eats this organic stuff I'm condemning. I'm not. But I'm just saying that there's a lot of guardrails that we have that literally nobody talks about ever. So be careful about superstition. Be careful about gluttony, because we all think it's just being really fat and eating like an entire family-sized thing of Cheetos off your belly. And that is it. But it's also caring about that particular Cheeto, or getting a Cheeto, if they exist, that's a raw, vegan, color-free Cheeto, because only the best for me. Don't do that. It's not good for you. ironically, to always pursue the highest quality everything. You become a slave to it, and you can't enjoy simple pleasures, and it's just it's ruinous to your soul. Like, you're still on the ground if you can't handle gluttony. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm on the ground right there with you guys, but you're not even in the spiritual fight if you haven't dealt with this. And it regards not just quantity, but quality. Keep that in mind. I mean, if you're always buying the highest quality thing you can possibly find at the store, think about it. Rash judgment and slander, this type of anger that we have at those milk producers for putting antibiotics in my milk. Well, they don't. That's a rash judgment, that's slander. Or the farmers who put glyphosate in. Well, maybe there's a good reason they do that. Or these people who put preservatives in my food. Well, maybe it limits food waste. Maybe it allows us to use less arable land because we don't have to double make things. Maybe it lowers food costs. Maybe it makes the less fortunate people able to get food. Like, who knows? Maybe the preservatives are fine and you don't have a reasonable basis to reject that. Maybe the amount of preservatives you eat in a lifetime is incredibly, incredibly low. I don't know, but we should be careful about rash judgments and slander. Instead, we got to have that virtue, the one of observance, where we actually observe people in their post and apply due honor to excellence and to position. It's important. As is prudence, so we can't be imprudent. We should put our quantitative caps on for this type of question and try to make the best steps that we can take to get to health. And I think that's moving the big rocks and doing the most important things. Lots of people live healthy lives eating some weird stuff. And I'll leave you with, I think there was one more thing, but I already forgot it. Hopefully you didn't. Let's skip to our man, the Apostle Paul. Here are some parting words for you guys, because they were parting words to Timothy. From 1 Timothy. The Spirit clearly says that in latter times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared with a hot iron. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods, the glyphosate, which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. For everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, because it is consecrated by the word of God and prayer. If you point these things out to the brothers and sisters, you'll be a good minister of Jesus Christ, nourished on the truths of the faith and of the good teaching that you have followed. Have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. Rather, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. This is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. That is why we labor and strive, because we have put our hope in the living God, who is the Savior of all people, and especially those who believe. So, a lot of people say this food, that food's bad for a variety of reasons. I think God created everything. God even created all the chemicals and preservatives. Yeah, we did it, but you know what? Everything comes from God ultimately. And although you shouldn't eat bad things, sure, that's not what we're saying. But I think it's showing that there's a type of spirit that says, oh, abstain from all these foods. It makes you worry about this. And Paul's just kind of waving his hands and saying, listen, everything God created is good. Just eat the food and do it thankfully. Because you know what? It's consecrated and set aside for you through the word of God and prayer. So that's what I would invite you to do instead, is don't worry about the highest quality things. Don't be afraid. Instead, be thankful. Be thankful for the crazy amount of food that's wicked delicious and in every grocery store and unprecedentedly affordable and nutritious and can help you live a healthy enough life to do your duty, to worship God, to be a friend, to be a husband, to be a wife, to do all the things which God has called you to do. We live in a wonderful time, and our attitude ought to be, well, principally of thankfulness. Which reminds me, Thank you for listening, guys. And please share this with the crunchiest, most vegan person that you possibly know. Maybe somebody who's ascribing some occult powers to sourdough. Not the sourdough. I'm not throwing no shade. But share this with a friend or whoever you share such things with. And I hope you listen to the next episode, which no idea what it will be. But thanks for listening this time.